Okay, we are back. I'm very excited to have on the Goldstein On Gelt Show Andy Andrews. He's a best-selling author. He's written a number of books, and he's, in fact, lived not only a fascinating life, but it kind of started out real tricky following the passing of his parents. Andy, maybe you could give us a little background.
Yeah, Doug, I'm honored to be with you today, and I did. I lived a fairly normal life until I was 19 years old, and both my parents died during the same year. My mom died of cancer. My dad was killed in an automobile accident. And long story short, I took a bad situation and made it much worse with some of the choices that I made, and ended up within a couple of years literally homeless. Before that was even a word. 35 years ago, nobody was talking about homeless people. That wasn't a term anybody used, but I was living under a pier on the Gulf Coast here in the United States, and I was in and out of people's garages, and I worked. I was cleaning fish, I was washing boats, I was selling fish, selling bait, but I was there for a couple of years, and during that time, met an old man who really took a unique interest in me, got me started reading actual books. I had always been kind of a magazine person.
I hear.
But during that time, I read over 200 biographies of these happy, influential, wealthy, hugely successful people, trying to figure out why did they turn out like they did? Were they born this way, or was it something they did? Because I knew if they were born this way, I was out of luck. But if it was something they did, what did they do, and how long did it take them to do it? And I identified 7 things, and these weren't 7 habits, they weren't 7 theories or ideas. I knew they weren't mine, but I came to realize there were 7 principles. And these were 7 principles that I started throwing in my life at that point to yank myself out of the circumstances. And the years later, they became these 7 decisions in my book, The Traveler's Gift, and in the book, The 7 Decisions. And so these still really resonate through my work because, as you know, Doug, principles work every time, and they work whether you know them or not. Right? I mean, yeah. The principle of gravity was working long before the apple ever fell on Newton's head. But once it did, and once we understood it, then we were able to harness that principle to create airline flight or suspension bridges or any number of things. The principle of gravity holds sway over. Well, the principles of personal success, the principles of parenting, the principles of financial achievement, the principles of leadership, these principles are floating around out there too. So why shouldn't we learn them and harness them to create the future of our choosing?
I think a lot of that actually, it's interesting the way you describe it because, my day job is that I'm a financial advisor. I sit with people and I help them develop their financial plans and, the strategies that they need to follow in order to be successful. And there are several, and it's not that there's an infinite number of things that you have to know. And in fact, I recently wrote a book with a world chess champion, a woman named Susan Polgar, who also lived a pretty tough life. And like you, she decided she was going to work hard and succeed. But she said on the chessboard, you have to first develop your overall strategy before you make a move. And I said, hey, Susan, that's just like in investing. And we ended up writing a book. But it sounds like the same thing you're talking about, which is you have to have kind of these big picture approaches before you decide what you're going to do, this morning when you wake up.
Yeah, that's very cool. Before I even say anything about that, what's the name of the book?
Thanks. The name of the book is called Rich as a King, How the Wisdom of Chess Can Make You a Grandmaster of Investing.
Rich as a king. That is okay. All right. But you guys are exactly right. You do have to really know where you're going before you can develop a strategy. And it is shocking to me. Yeah, I work with tons of teams. I work with tons of companies, and it is amazing to me how many people allow their methods to determine their results. They're all about their methods, and they look at what has been done before and what they could do. And if we do this, what might happen, or what's the best we could do, rather than determining what the best is and then designing the methods to move toward that result. It's a much more practical and real way of making things happen. And when you look and you see what the greatest among us have ever done, that's exactly what they did.
We are talking with Andy Andrews. He's a New York Times best-selling author. He wrote fabulous books, The Traveler's Gifts, The Noticer, How Do You Kill 11 Million People? Shocking titles as well. And he learned a lot of what he did by just reading other books. I'm a big fan of reading books and learning from history, which is critical. All right, Andy, I got to ask you for a couple of secrets because you, of course, mentioned the 7 decisions, and you've written a book about it. Maybe you can give us a little taste of one or two that people can have a takeaway from listening to us today.
Yeah, the 7 decisions there's none of them that you would hear and go, oh my gosh, I never heard that. But I really believe in today's world we have an amazing ability to think logically to incorrect results. And some of them are becoming dangerous. And so these 7 decisions are much the same. Even though you have heard them before, a lot of us don't really grasp their power. And the first one is a great example of that. The first one is responsibility, taking responsibility. And of course, we hear this all the time, but I think that people hear it in terms of 2 extremes. They hear one extreme saying, until these people accept responsibility, they'll never be able to. And then you got the other side going, but it's not their fault. Don't you know what their mother was like? And so these 2 extremes. But the truth is that neither of those extremes are really correct when we're talking about taking responsibility, because responsibility doesn't have anything to do with blaming people or making people feel bad about where they're from. Responsibility has to do with hope and control. And who among us doesn't want to have hope for a greater future that we can control? If you blame your mom or your dad or the government or the weather, there's not a lot of hope there, and there's zero control. Right? I mean, I don't know about you, Doug, but my wife, if it's my wife's fault, I what am I going to do? I can't control my wife, right?
And certainly you wouldn't say anything.
Yeah. And so, but if I can look in the mirror and I can say, you know what, I've had some crazy things happen to me. I've had some tragedies happen, and I couldn't control any of them. But I have made choices in response to those crazy things that have led me down this pathway to a place I don't like. If we can understand and believe we can make choices that will lead us to a place we don't like, it's great news, because you could logically understand then that obviously I could make choices that will lead me to a place that I do like. That's the game.
It's a great point. It very much applies also in the world of personal finance, which is
exactly.
You can't control the market. It's how you react to what happens, which you can control, and that's where I think people have a lot of problems.
That's exactly right. And the second one is seeking wisdom.
Wait, hold on. Don't go that far. I want to ask a question on this one. Why?
Okay.
I'm a little stuck on this about taking responsibility. Why is it that someone would be willing to listen to you to tell him to take responsibility when everything is handed to him anyway? And I don't want to get political here, but I get the feeling that there's this sort of a trend since I grew up that people feel, all right, my school is taken care of, and now my health care and my job, and I'm not really responsible. And if it doesn't work out well, the government's there, my parents are there. If it's all handed to you, except for the few unique people who decide they want greatness, I think people would get kind of lazy, no?
Well, you're exactly right. I mean, it does. That does breed laziness, and it is also a very short-lived family strategy, if you know what I mean. I mean, a government or a nation is nothing in the world but a large family. And so I am always amazed at how many people that, would say, oh, we need to, give money to everybody. We need to take care of everybody. And yet they would not buy their own 16-year-old a car. They're going to make him buy his own car because they know that he will take care of it if he has to put something into it. And so, you got to look at the larger view of this and understand that it isn't, it isn't. It's like in our area, Doug, years ago, people would plant trees in my area. It's a very hilly country, and machines can't do it. And so they would put out the call for people to come plant trees and plant as many as you want. We're going to pay you X amount per tree. Well, at some point, they put out the call, and the nobody came, and they said, what's going on? They said, well, the government now, and this was back in the 40s in America, and the government is now paying these people, but if they have a job, they can't get that money, and the government's paying them more than you're paying them to the trees, and so they're staying at home. Well, there's no machine that could plant the trees, and so the industry itself kind of fell apart, and so in that area, and so people would say, well, then the immigrants started coming in and doing this work, and they said, well, the immigrants were taking people's jobs. No, the government took their jobs. Mm-hmm. The immigrants just came in and did work nobody wanted to do. But anytime you give people something, that's the end result. I mean, you can just see it in families, you can see it in governments, you can see it in school systems.
And I think you see it in personal finance, that if you, we talk about that, all the time, about teaching your kids, and, parents who they just give too much, and the kids are never responsible, and they never have to make their own living. And therefore, when they eventually come into the real world, they get stuck. Andy, something you've been telling us a very, very important lesson about taking responsibility, and I know you have 6 more to share, but we don't have time in today's show. But do me a favor. Tell me now, in the last minute or so, what's the best way for people to, A, follow the work you're doing, and since we've been talking about parenting and teaching, what would you say is the best way for people maybe to learn to teach their kids a little bit better?
Well, people can follow me very easily. I'm on Facebook, find Andy Andrews and click like. I will be your friend. I'm on Twitter.
At least I'll have one friend.
at andyandrews.com. And I'm also, I have a website, andyandrews.com. And on that website, I have a podcast that's weekly. It's absolutely free. Just put your email address in there, and we talk about money and thinking and parenting and life. And then if you also look on the cover of the, on the homepage of the website, there are 4 parenting videos that you can watch absolutely free, 20-minute each, and this is the best work I've ever done, Doug, because I've started to figure out that investing, that everything we do is parenting.
I think that's critical. I think it's a great lesson, and I encourage everyone to check those links out. We will put links to all of that at the show notes at goldsteinongelt.com. Andy Andrews, thanks really very, very much for taking the time to talk today.
Buddy, I'm honored. Thank you so much. And they're lucky to have you there, and I will be following your career. And anytime you want to talk, give me a call.
Looking forward.
You've been listening to the Goldstein On Gelt Show with international investment expert Doug Goldstein. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, go to www.goldsteinongelt.com or write to Doug directly at doug@profile-financial.com.